Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a very critical update in regards to the Israel Iran conflict, in regards to U.S. national intelligence and the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who, right now, if you look on Polymarket, has the highest chance of leaving the current administration out of any of the cabinet members. Now, there's been some stuff that's come out over the past few weeks. We know Trump is deciding whether to strike Iran in response to them maybe developing a nuclear weapon. We're going to dive into Tulsi's report back in March on the Iranians and Khamenei not developing a nuclear weapon while admitting the enrichment level, which the Iranians say is for medical purposes of 60%, is aggressive, and it did violate the Obama nuclear deal where the enrichment level was only supposed to be 3.67%. Of course, the Obama nuclear deal doesn't matter because they ripped it up. Trump ripped it up back in 2018. But it's very key what Tulsi Gabbard said back in March, where she said they have not resumed weaponization. She admitted they had enrichment levels that were aggressive, but there are a number of different steps when it comes to making a nuclear bomb, including miniaturization and also testing it. We know North Korea has had several problems, even though they are nuclear and they do have nuclear capability, testing it. I mean, they went through like 7 tests before they even had a successful one. Iran hasn't gone through any tests. We know that. So the fear mongering about Iran, it's completely out of control. And that's all Tulsi Gabbard was saying. But now it seems like they've backed Tulsi into a corner and they forced her to go along with this narrative. And I like Trump, but at the end of the day, we're all just people. We all have our own opinions. We have to admit some of the stuff that Trump is saying is just, it just doesn't make sense. And I don't want to say, well, maybe it's blackmail, whatever, but this is really not how Trump has been in the past in terms of these Middle Eastern conflicts, in terms of his thoughts on involving the United States in it. Trump this past 2 weeks just has this weird tunnel vision where he's obsessed and he says they can't have a nuclear bomb, they can't have a nuclear bomb, they can't have a nuclear bomb. And then he says, oh, I've been saying that forever. Yeah, but why? We had a deal where they weren't going to have a nuclear bomb. They were at 3.67% enrichment. That was Obama's deal that took 20 months to negotiate. Another thing, it's like, why only give 2 months to negotiate? He gave them 60 days. The Obama nuclear deal took 20 months. So, and look, I like Trump, trust me, but we're all humans. We have to just, when he does something that's bad, it is what it is. It's unfortunate. And now Trump is going out and just going against his own intelligence, saying Tulsi Gabbard's lying because Israel said, oh, they've developed like, I mean, what about Netanyahu saying they have the capacity for 6 nuclear bombs? It's all the fear mongering. It's the same tactics back in the early 2000s that got us into those Middle Eastern wars. I think we've learned from it. That's why a lot of people are against this and say, well, no, it can't happen whether we voted for Trump or not. People are like, this is not good, and you have to be honest. I mean, we're not going to agree with everything. And I think even Trump himself would deep down say, this isn't the best thing. Getting Tulsi in the cabinet wasn't easy. There were a lot of Democrats that didn't want it. And she's saying, well, they are not trying to achieve weaponization, which is different, even though they're at 60% enrichment. Let's not do something we're going to regret when it comes to potentially striking Iran. And we know Israel is obsessed with it right now because of how limited the proxies supposedly are, although they'll likely be more active if the United States gets involved. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, and possibly also Russia and China. China likely to a more bigger degree, although who knows. It's been reported, at least right now, China is being very coy about the situation and their partnership with Iran. Russia actually already offered to help Iran, and Iran denied it. But let's look into this. This is the question. Well, I'm just going to play this instead, and we'll see what Trump says here, talking about the U.S. intelligence saying they're not trying for weaponization. Yes, they've got 60% enrichment. We know that's an escalation, but that's because Trump ripped up the original deal, so they're at higher. Now, you can say, well, the original deal was bad because it didn't include proper oversight, and they were going to get there anyways. Okay, but the original deal got ripped up, so they started more enrichment. They got to 60% enrichment. And there's a key difference in terms of actually going for weaponization. That's what Gabbard's report said. They weren't going for weaponization. They weren't going to try and militarize to be able to make the nuclear bomb. There's multiple steps. It's just not 90% enrichment. And so that's what Gabbard was saying. But let's see this.
So you have that Iran is building a nuclear weapon. Your intelligence community has said they have no evidence that they are at this point.
Well, then my intelligence community is wrong. Who in the intelligence community said that?
Your director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard.
She's wrong.
And so Trump, who is probably getting a direct report from Tel Aviv, is saying, well, no, it's wrong. It's my own director of national intelligence who joined the cabinet right after, Trump got in. I mean, it hasn't been long. Totally discounting Gabbard's report. And then Tulsi Gabbard says, the dishonest media is intentionally taking my testimony out of context and spreading fake news as a way to manufacture division. America has intelligence that Iran is at the point to where they can produce a nuclear weapon within weeks to months. And, that's based off of the 60% enrichment. The point is there's no clear weaponization. And a lot of this is fear-mongering by Israel to try and, it's a propaganda thing. And for whatever reason, Trump now is completely bought in within the last 2 weeks, just out of the blue. He's totally bought in to they have a nuclear bomb and they're going to, oh, you know what? They haven't even tested one. Again, compare that to North Korea, they've gone nuclear. They've been nuclear for many years. They test these bombs. It doesn't work. It's a long process in having legitimate nuclear capability, let alone reaching Israel, let alone reaching the United States. But we're going to go and invest into a potential, whether it's a war, whether it's just strikes, whatever they call it, because Iran is going to decide, you know what, let's just drop our first nuclear bomb without any tests. We're just going to drop it on the United States, the most powerful country in the world, thousands of miles away. That's going to work out really well. I mean, this is insane. There is no way that it's just like, and I understand that Israel is scared, they're nervous, they're concerned, but it's obviously another opportunistic moment for them to fearmonger U.S. citizens to death. And Tulsi Gabbard now, listen, this is what happens. I'll just tell you the political spin on how this goes. This is Trump's decision. He has decided to take the administration in this way, to have this viewpoint, instead of being skeptical with Israel and say, we don't know, we know what happened with Libya, we know what happened with Iraq, we know what happened with Afghanistan. Let's calm down on the idea of weapons of mass destruction 2.0. Let's calm down on that. Instead of doing that, he said, no, they've got it, it's over, they've got it. Anyone who's, and my director of national intelligence who says they don't have it is lying. And behind the scenes, they probably told Tulsi Gabbard, this is Trump's thing. You need to say that you were wrong or that it was misconstrued or whatever. But it's very clear. Tulsi Gabbard said they were not trying to achieve weaponization. Yes, they were at 60% enrichment. Yes, that could be seen as an escalation. Iran was saying, well, no, it's for medical purposes, and we know that's likely not true, but it's more of a deterrent for Iran, the idea that they're going to build one rather than them actually having a nuclear weapon, let alone having the capacity to do tests and then have successful tests and then successfully launch it and perform a strike on the United States. Are you kidding? You know how long that would take? Come on. And so you really got to feel for Tulsi here. And people say, well, she's a coward. She shouldn't do this. She should go against Trump. This is how politics is. They tell you to do something, you better do it. This is the administration. And so, look, nobody is saying that Iran having a nuclear weapon is a good thing. Any U.S. adversary or any U.S. enemy that has a nuclear weapon, honestly, anyone outside of the United States in general, we want as little as nuclear spread as possible when it comes to the amount of countries that are capable of detonating a nuclear bomb. We want the spread as little as possible. But we know what's happening here. Iran's proxies are weakened. Israel sees it as a moment to strike. And so it's the nuclear bomb, nuclear bomb, nuclear bomb, nuclear bomb, nuclear bomb. They bring in someone from the outside a little bit, like Tulsi. And she says back in March, no, they're not currently weaponization. There's no weaponization. Stop the fear mongering. And then 3 months later, Israel says, and Trump says, we're going to take care of that right now. You better change your statement. You better say it's a mischaracterization. They're at 60% enrichment. That's good enough. Get the American people on our side. We're going to do this. And it's the deception. It's just like, well, whether or not we perform the strike, I still think what's likely going to happen, because there's just no way. And look, they're still saying they're negotiating. I think you could also make an argument Trump was waiting for some things that to arrive in the Middle East, like the aircraft carriers. But maybe there'll be a negotiation. Maybe we'll work something out. But it still seems likely that there will be strikes on Fordo, although it's interesting now. Netanyahu is saying, well, we don't need the United States to achieve what we want, and maybe they will strike Fordo instead of the U.S. And I know people say, oh, they can't penetrate Fordo based on... Yeah, I know, I understand. I've been saying it for 2 weeks that they can't do that. The point is that they're shifting it to where maybe Israel will perform the strikes and they'll destroy enough of it to force Iran into a negotiation. I mean, it's clear Iran cannot want to go up against the United States. That's just not, you're not going to want to do that. But they also are not going to have their nuclear program be completely destroyed, in the sense of an agreement with the United States to where, oh yeah, we'll just hand over everything. We'll get rid of all of our centrifuges. And it just, that in terms of that diplomacy, that would not work likely without a show of force from the United States, meaning they would have to strike the nuclear facilities, and then Iran would be forced, they'd be on their knees and they'd be forced into a deal, which I think is probably what Trump is going for. Trump is not going for a long-term military operation in Iran, obviously. Now, Israel might have other plans, and the question is, because of how this has happened the last 2 weeks in terms of Trump bending to Israel, is that something that Trump ends up letting Israel do? In terms of some type of, it's also reported that Israel was gearing up for a long war with Iran, and they demanded regime change, and they know this is the best time to make it happen. And for them, it's a long time coming. And so they're seeing this window, and they know that Trump is a lot more aggressive. It's like this horrible, crazy thing that we've been talking about the past week, 2 weeks, about, oh my goodness, it's doomsday, Iran getting a nuclear bomb. Where was this talk in 2022? Where was this talk in 2023? Where was this talk last year in 2024? It's obvious Israel views Trump as more favorable in terms of aggressive military action in the Middle East than they viewed the previous administration. And so, it's just tough to see this, because you could tell Tulsi, someone a little bit different, comes in, says, no, we're going to stop the fear mongering. Yes, they're at 60% enrichment, but there's no weaponization, and there you have to miniaturize it, and there's so many different steps in terms of even performing a test of a nuclear bomb. And so I agree. I think they're at 60% enrichment. That's according to independent agencies. I get it. It's a lot, but that's also in part because the original deal got ripped up. And it's like, well, Iran hates the United States. Okay, well, they hate the United States. They're 8,000, 9,000 miles away. What are they going to do about it? Oh, they're going to drop a nuclear bomb. Really? So they're going to destroy their own country to drop a nuclear bomb in which they haven't tested, that they haven't even created, that we know. That you could say, well, they've created. Okay, where are the tests at? You know how many tests North Korea had to do before they had a successful nuclear-grade weapon? And then they're gonna send it to the United States thousands of miles away as their first trial run. Oh yeah, let's go. Oh, you know what? Better yet, because they killed a military general, let's just assassinate Trump. That'll go really well. That's a great way to get your country blown up. Let's assassinate the leader of the most powerful country on earth. That's real smart. It's like none of this makes any sense. And so, you kind of have to just say it. I don't know what to tell people. It's just a bunch of fear-mongering. And look, I hope Trump says, we're not doing this. We're sick of the fear-mongering. And maybe he'll have an epiphany, and maybe he'll be like, well, I don't care. I'm done with the blackmail. I'm sick of it. And, we trust Trump is going to do the right thing here. And maybe there'll be a strike, but it's going to be limited. And Trump said that he wants it to be limited. And he's talking about he just wants it to be over. Is that maybe a threat about using a tactical nuke? That's just a major escalation. That's not going to happen. This is what the B-2 MOBs were built for, penetrating Fordo. or facilities like that deep into them, 200, 300 feet. So I think why not use an MOB when we're not trying to escalate that far anyways. But a lot of the proxies are going to be awake if the United States gets involved in this. The Iranian proxies, and you can say, well, they're weakened right now, and that's why this is happening. And I agree, but they're still there. And so that's another thing to take into account. You could also say right now, Iran, that politically they seem to be isolated, to where if you're the United States, there could be justification because of how weak the proxies are, because of how coy Russia and China are being. Although Russia did offer to help them, at least in a defensive capacity, and they denied it. If the United States enters, it is a major escalation, and it will have a significant effect on the U.S. economy. If this drives oil to $120 a barrel, we've just lost everything we had building in terms of the stable ground of this economy. If you have $120 oil for 1 month, 2 months, whatever it ends up being, because it's a ripple effect, and then it's a lag and it's prolonged issues. Let's just not do it, because there's no reason to do it. We could have negotiated whatever deal with Iran in terms of 2%, 3% enrichment, I think. I mean, I don't know exactly what Iran is proposing, but it's been reported they're willing to have flexibility. And then you could say, well, they'll just lie about their numbers. Well, you know what? What about Mossad? Mossad can go deal with them then. Mossad can deal with them. Why would we deal with this country 9,000 miles away from us? Oh, they may or may not be lying about nuclear enrichment. Well, you know what? We hope as little as U.S. adversaries and enemies as possible have nuclear capacity, but we cannot. I mean, we just did this in 2001. So let's just not do this anymore. And that's what people are saying. So with Tulsi, you see this stuff and it's like, well, obviously she has to come out now and say, my boss is right. My boss who says, has said they have a nuclear weapon because Israel told him, so he's right. And you have to say it, right? All right. But there's a talking to behind the scenes, and Trump obviously is portraying the administration in a certain light. And what Tulsi said back in March does not align. So Tulsi needs to say, oh, you know what? Yeah, I said they're not currently actively trying to weaponize, but they do have 60% enrichment, and this we can run at 60%, 60%, 60%, 60%. No, I agree they have 60% enrichment, and they started really making it public, after the deal got wrapped up in 2018, and Israel loved that because it puts us in a position right now. And you can say the deal was bad. That deal took 20 months to negotiate. Trump gives this negotiation 2 months only. Why? The Obama deal took 20 months, and really over 2 years if you think about it. But it's like, are we going to lose our minds because Pakistan has nuclear capable weapons? We would prefer they didn't have them either. And then how about Israel and their nuclear program and the stolen uranium in the 1960s out of Pennsylvania? But I guess it's all right. And you know what? They are an ally, so I will say it's apples to oranges. It is. Iran is not an ally. We would rather only allies have nuclear capacity. Absolutely. But I mean, that's just hypocrisy in terms of the way they founded their nuclear program, which they still won't admit. So there's a lot of issues with this. And my hope is that, we support Trump and we want Trump to do well. And so, whatever Trump does, we'll be able to explain it, but it is a problem. And so hopefully if there is some type of strike, we can keep it contained and there can be some type of immediate ceasefire after that. They were talking about doing maybe some type of ceasefire with some of the European powers, which seems, I don't know what type of, how that's going to work. You got to talk to the United States if you're going to do some type of peace deal. I mean, maybe there could be facilitation from France, but yeah. I mean, right now nobody really knows what Trump's going to do. The hope is that there is maybe a maximum pressure, scare tactics. He hasn't done anything yet, and maybe that he's waiting for certain things to happen. He's waiting for units. He's waiting for military weaponry to get to certain areas before he launches anything. Maybe it's just a waiting game on that. Maybe he really is waiting for negotiations. The problem is Iran will not agree, and maybe they'll change their mind if it gets to like the 11th hour and it's they're about to get struck, and they're like, all right, we'll agree. But it does not seem fundamentally, there's a fundamental difference in terms of these negotiations. The United States demands zero enrichment and possibly all of their nuclear facilities to be destroyed or shut down. And Iran is saying, no, we're keeping enrichment. So that's the fundamental difference. So how does that get resolved? Well, it's very likely it's not going to get resolved. The way it gets resolved is the United States will bomb their nuclear facilities. And so that's where we're at right now. So it's not a simple thing to where it's, well, but I mean, this whole thing with, the administration's tagline right now is based off of fear of Iran developing a nuclear weapon. Their director of national intelligence said 3 months ago, they're not weaponizing it. And yes, they're at 60% enrichment, but there's a big process that has to take place before you can even test a nuclear bomb. And from what we found is they are not at that level. They're not even close to the level of being able to test one. So that was 3 months ago. And now Trump is telling his director of national intelligence, shut up, you're wrong. I mean, look, and I'm sure that, the intelligence that Trump is getting is Mossad reports, okay. And Israel, they understand how weak Iran is right now, and that's why it's important for them to potentially strike. I just hope Trump can come to an agreement with Iran, and we don't have to deal with this. I mean, could you imagine the cascade effect if the United States does join, the sleeper cells are awoke, and the Strait of Hormuz gets bombed, or Iran starts sinking ships and disrupts it? I mean, it is going to have a major impact on China as well. So that would be the hope, to where they wouldn't close it. They've threatened to close it many times since 1980. I think it's like 15 times in total. So they've made this threat a ton, but it is escalation. That, I mean, hopefully, even if there is escalation, there is some type of immediate ceasefire after that. And because this becomes a fog of war thing, if the U.S. does strike in some capacity, there is going to be return fire from Iran to the military bases, the U.S. military bases where there are U.S. troops. And so that's going to be up to Trump, and that'll be the next big decision on how he decides to handle that. Is there more escalation, or is there immediate talk? All right, we hit you, you hit us. We destroyed, a nuclear facility, a mega nuclear facility that you guys desperately need. We did what we wanted. And now I've seen a lot of MAGA people saying, well, it's a get in, get out. We're going to do that, and then that's it. Well, it's really not it, because they are going to return fire. And so would Trump do anything about that return that could drag the United States into this war even more? That to me, that's the next question if this ends up going the way it does. Also, we'd have to see how successful the strike on Fordo ends up being, because now they're saying, and that's the reason the tactical nuke was brought up, well, it turns out the B-2 bombers and the MLBs are not going to be powerful enough to fully penetrate and completely destroy the nuclear facilities underneath the mountain at Fordo. So that's why a tactical nuke would be needed. I don't think that's the case. I think they're going to go with the MOBs and the stealth bomber. But either way, it's been reported Trump has okayed whatever they're going to be doing. He just has to give a final sign-off, which potentially will depend on other things. Maybe it'll depend on negotiations, how those are going. He said he wanted to give it 2 weeks, or it's either 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks, so it could be at any point. We don't know exactly. Trump, it's in his nature to go for some type of negotiation, but he's acted differently during this entire saga ever since the Israel strikes. Because originally we were back in March, we were saying this is great what Trump is doing. He is calming Israel down when they wanted to do a joint strike with the United States, when Waltz was talking with Netanyahu, and it was reported that they were very close, and then Trump reassigned him and other people within Trump's administration. Apparently now it's being reported Hegseth is being frozen out to a degree. Vance was against it. Now Vance is really just coming out in support of Trump, and in some cases trying to justify a potential strike, and that's really what Trump has done as well. That's the whole idea of them having a nuclear bomb or developing it, and how catastrophic it would be for the United States. So there has to be a justification. You're also talking about, well, there's a window now that Trump has given. It's 2 weeks, to where there could be a justification without Trump really looking like he's making a tough decision, because right now, if you strike them, it's a tough decision either way, because there's people within the base that don't agree with this. However, if something happens, maybe Iran does something domestically, and you say, well, Biden let someone in and look at what happened. Or maybe Iran does something in the Middle East to try and to maybe that's viewed as an escalation when it comes to hitting a U.S. ship, when it comes to hitting a U.S. base, although they've said that they're going to be reactionary, meaning they're not going to strike the U.S. first, but they will return the fire. And so you have to wonder, are we in that moment right now to where something happens and Trump says, my hands are tied, I have to do it? Or is it just going to be this tough decision to where, no, I have my reason. I've been saying they can't have a nuclear bomb, or even though my own intelligence is saying 3 months ago, no, they're not actively developing one. We've got new intelligence now from Israel that says they are. And, you know, we can sit here and argue about it. But the thing is, this is a fundamental thing. They have not tested a nuclear bomb. There are many processes that have to be, it's not just getting to 90% enrichment. There's processes after that in terms of creating a nuclear bomb that it is extremely unlikely that Iran have done at this point. Because people say they already have it. But listen, maybe they do. I mean, you know, what do I know? But it's just, it seems very, very unlikely based on the information we have, based on their supposed enrichment level. Obviously, if their enrichment level is anywhere at around 60%, it would take, hypothetically, a few months to go nuclear. But then you're also talking about other variables at play in terms of having a successful launch. We'll just have to see what ends up happening with this. And it'll likely get solved within the next few... Well, the first stage of it will get solved. Hopefully it's the last stage, which is some type of ceasefire negotiations. The ceasefire would be between Israel and Iran. And, I mean, it's the fog of war. There's been reports that Israel got hit really hard and they're shocked. And there's been reports that Iran is running out of missiles. So that's where you get the fog of war. Very similar thing with Russia, Ukraine, when they said, oh, Russia's going to take over all of Ukraine in 2 weeks. Okay. So you have to wait on these things to where when they say, you know, one of the sides is doing very bad, normally it's they're never doing as bad as the people say. But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.